Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Deena Kashyap, retired now. I was the former Deputy Director and Emeritus Professor at the Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. This is the module on competencies needed for social work practice in disability studies in the course on disability studies as a field of practice in social work. In this module, I'm going to talk about two things. The scope, very quickly, the scope of social work practice in disability studies and competencies needed in social work practice in disability studies. Of all the rehabilitation professionals, social workers are the only professionals who work with people with disabilities through their lifespan, and their focus is on self-determination and holistic analysis of the issues that the individual is facing, which includes the individual and systemic factors. And our focus is on providing appropriate and targeted services to meet the complex and whole life needs of people with disabilities. We also work towards supporting them in when they advocate for their rights and facilitate their empowerment. Where do we work as disability social workers? We work in governmental and non-governmental organizations and in the emerging private sector and even in private practice. Some of the primary settings that we work in are hospitals, special schools for children with disabilities, early intervention centers, institutions for disabled children and adults, aged care services for disabled, elderly, special educational and vocational training centers, advocacy groups for people with disability or self-help groups of parents of people with disabilities, also self-help groups of adults with disability. Some of the secondary settings that we work in are health and mental health services, mainstream educational services, urban and rural communities, and with child protection and the justice services. Besides the generic social work knowledge and values that you will obtain or achieve as a person who studies does an MA in social work, you also need to have certain knowledge, values and skills in order to become a competent disability social worker. What are these other competencies that you will require? Let us look at some of them. First of all, not only do you identify yourself as a social worker, you need to identify yourself as a disability social worker. What do I mean by that? That as a disability social worker, you will contest the experts discourse. We are not experts, we are partners, and we are equal partners collaborating with people with disabilities. We need to demonstrate a strong belief that the problems faced by people with disabilities are more the attitudes of society and other professionals and the inadequate support services that become social and economic barriers to the person's impairment. Also, we need to demonstrate that we will find solutions to the problems through self-advocacy, through helping the disabled person to advocate for themselves. We need to work with the systems to advocate for change in systems and elimination of barriers that do not allow the person to achieve their full potential. And we need to work towards outcomes of any service delivery which the persons with disability themselves want. So we need to approach our work with human rights, strengths, related perspectives, and using the social discourse and anti-oppressive and partnership practice and empowerment of people with disabilities. That is the way we need to work with them and identify ourselves. So we also need to regularly be involved in multidisciplinary rehabilitation teams as advocates for people with disabilities. Now, the second uh, competency that we need to acquire as a disability social worker is that the ethical principles of social work and disability studies, we need to, that is what should guide us in our professional practice. So we should demonstrate respect for, social work tells us that we need to respect the individual's individuality and dignity and right to acceptance and self-determination and empowerment. And we need to, going a little further, we need to demonstrate that all people, regardless of differences, have a right to be included in society. And they need to have facilities that are given to all members as citizens. We need to show our commitment to diversity and difference and to accept diversity and difference. And we need to work towards elimination of oppression and focus on strengths of the clients rather than their pathology. So it's not as if we are saying that the problems will go away if we don't think about the problems. The problems are certainly there, but that's only one part of the issue. The person also has strengths, and we need to focus on their strengths. And if we focus on their strengths, then they themselves will be able to be empowered. And we need to recognize and reorient our own beliefs, views, and feelings which negatively influence the client professional system. I would always say that we need to ask ourselves, what do we think about people with disabilities? Do we think of them as poor people, pity? Do we feel a sense of pity for them? Do we feel a sense of sympathy for them? What is it that we feel? Or are we disgusted? Do we find it distasteful to be with them? What do we ourselves feel? We need to check our own feelings first and our own biases. And these biases may be based on hearsay, be based on some of the things that we have been told as we've grown up. So, but we need to question those. Going on from what I said in the second competency, the third competency that you need to develop is a greater self-awareness about your own feelings, your own thinking about disability, how it is caused, or what really is the difference between impairment and disability and handicap. Okay, and also to look at support structures. But let me talk about the damaging effects of psycho-emotional disablism. Very often, we ourselves may inadvertently, I may say, be be feeling having these attitudes of psycho-emotional disablism. For instance, we may think that a person will not be able to, for instance, walk up to the chair. So we will take their hand and we will put them near the chair instead of saying, yeah, if you walk, if a blind person is there, you walk 2 steps and you will reach your chair. So first ask whether they require help before just going and assuming that they require help and giving it to them. We definitely need to look at the way we have the kind of relationship, professional relationship that we have formed with the disabled person. If there are any prejudices within our own selves and our own relationship with the disabled person, do we look down on them? Do we feel superior to them? Do we feel that we are more lucky because we don't have a disability? What is our attitude towards the person with disability? What kind of a relationship? Is it a partnership relationship, or is it a dependency relationship that we are trying to build? Do we say, don't worry, I will do everything for you, instead of saying, don't worry, I will help you to become self-supporting? So besides that, we need to also create our own support structures. We work in an environment that we are continuously facing a lot of difficulties. So there is something which you might have heard in your readings, something which is called burnout at a personal level. That is, you become almost immune to problems that people face, because you see so much tragedy in so many people's lives. So we need to prevent this kind of burning out by developing our own support system with colleagues who offer us unconditional acceptance and emotional support, who do not advise us but can become a sounding board for us when we want to talk to somebody about some issues that we may be facing, or a dilemma that we may be facing in our work. Then we need to apply, the fourth competency is that we need to apply critical thinking to inform and communicate professional judgments. Now, this is in any case a social work competency. But where do we go how much further do we need to go? When you need to develop an understanding and an ability to recognize that it's the social and structural barriers created by society that is disabling the person much more than his physical disabilities. And we need to find effective ways of removing the obstacles to inclusion for people with disability in the larger culture. And we need to have a much more multi-focused approach that includes knowledge of human functioning and behavior, socioeconomic, legal, cultural factors that interact and impact to produce stigma, to produce discrimination or marginalization of people with disabilities and their social isolation. So we need to develop our capacity for reflection, creativity, critical inquiry, and if we want to actually ensure that we have a evidence-based practice. Now, this competency is in fact very important for a disability social worker, that we engage diversity and difference in our practice. We need to incorporate the diversity perspective. Now, by diversity perspective, I mean not only understanding perspectives within the group. Like I said, that the disabled are a very heterogeneous group. They have different disabilities. They may have various kinds of disabilities, different degrees of disabilities. And the extent of the disabling condition will depend upon a lot of socioeconomic factors. So, not only understanding the difference between the groups, but also understanding the dynamics related to privilege, power, intergroup relations, and oppression, and their context. And so you need to be able to understand how the non-disabled population, the power and privileges that they hold affects the person with disability and his well-being. And we need not only to understand it, to recognize it, we need to challenge these unequal relationships and marginalization of people with disability by starting a very different kind of discourse for people with disabilities. We need to advocate. We need the next competency is engaging in practice that advocates for human rights and social and economic justice. Now, as I said in the very first subsection, that today disability studies, disability social work is a human rights, it takes on a human rights focus. And so, uh, as a disability social worker, you need to respect the dignity and citizenship rights of all people with disabilities. We need to recognize and expose the systemic barriers to the full participation of people with disabilities in all walks of life, in social, economic, and political institutions and in different arenas. Then going one step further, by creating these counter discourses from our clients, our people with disabilities whom we work with, their own lives, to show that their daily routine continues to be embedded in the process of exclusion, of which poverty is only one manifestation. How many, our biggest library, the Asiatic Library, has about, I don't know, 50 steps before it can. Now, can a wheelchair person, a person who uses a wheelchair, use such a service? Or our schools, they can be 3 and 5 storied schools, municipal or otherwise. Do any of them have elevators? And so a person who has a locomotor disorder, a person who has a visual impairment would find it very difficult to navigate through the school or through these public institutions. And so we need to, people don't realize that, in simple things that we take for granted, these very things are creating exclusion. These are exclusion, they exclude people from being able to use them. And then going one step further by building a commitment to social advocacy, social change, to client empowerment. So not only do we advocate, we empower the person with disability to advocate for themselves. And we support them in this, in their self advocacy. The seventh competency is applying knowledge of human behavior and the social empowerment. Now, this is again something that we definitely need to gain competency in. We need to understand our current practice realities. We need to understand the historic, social, political, economic environment, an environmental context of people with disabilities. That's one of the reasons why in the first section I talked about the rehabilitation context, because very often any lecture on disability starts with causes and incidents and this thing. So it will talk about objectified disability, but will not talk about the person. It's as if the person has no feelings, no emotions, is not a human being. So we need to understand their cultural realities. Then only we'll be able to provide the right kind of services. So when we comprehend the history, the social construction of disability, when we understand the cultural perspectives of the disabling condition and the impact of these perspectives, that the impact that it has on the person with disability and on his family, and how it impacts their reactions to this disabled person and to their ways of coping, then only will we be able to help them to confront the issues facing them, to confront social attitudes towards people with disabilities and their families. Then only will we be able to ensure that they live far more fuller lives, that their families do not also exclude themselves from their social life or withdraw from social life, as we find so many families having disabled children do. In fact, if we look at it, we also need to become knowledgeable about and examine very critically some of the legislative, programmatic, political, economic, theoretical formulations fundamental to service delivery. Are they disabled friendly, or are they still these policies and programmatic formulations, are they still having the dependency kind of perspective? Now, as problems faced by people with disabilities more due to external factors rather than the impairment alone, the solution also consists of self-advocacy, as I said earlier, to systems advocacy, to elimination of barriers. And these are not something that we need to decide what should be changed or what should not be changed. It should be the disabled person who decides what kind of solutions he wants, what kind of life does he want to live, what are the services that he would like. So so it's not the professional, you as a professional, that needs to discuss it. So we need to kind of step down from the experts' view of ourselves to taking on far more partnership view of ourselves, where we partner with people with disability. The next competency is, of course, to integrate theory and practice. Now, that is something that we need to do no matter which group of people we work with. But when we are talking about people with disability, we need to be able to examine this whole topic of disability from various perspectives, so that we gain a very historical development of the civil rights, the legal framework, the medical model. We do need to understand the medical model as well. And of course, understand the social model and how disability is viewed across different cultures. Disability can be viewed very differently in our tribal belts, in rural areas, as well as in urban areas, because as education spreads, it doesn't, with lack of education, the perspective is colored by superstition and misconceptions about why a person is disabled. So we need to examine how people with different types of disabilities are treated and denied equal access to programs and employment, and what political legal recourse is available to address these inequities. I'll always, when even in the field of disability, the locomotor, people with locomotor disorders or locomotor impairments and people with visual impairments have received much more from society than people with mental handicap or people with mental illness or even people with hearing impairment. With hearing impairment, because the impairment cannot be really seen. People with hearing impairment look like just you and me, except when there is a communication issue that one realizes that the person has a disabling condition. So we need to, the next competency is to engage in policy practice to advance social and economic well-being. So the point here is that as disability social workers, we need not only to be to work with at the micro level with people with disabilities and their families. We also need to work at the macro level to advance the policies, to kind of bring about changes in policies, to bring about some reforms in policies, and to bring about so that the people with disabilities uh, get a better deal as far as policy practice is concerned. So, and the last one is to develop an empowerment-based micro and macro partnership practice. So, as a disability social worker, you will need to demonstrate your competency in developing evidence-based informed assessments, planning, and interventions within an anti-oppressive and empowerment based partnership practice where we focus on the person, the strengths of the disabled person. We need to provide people with disabilities and their families the accurate information about the resources for maximizing their choice and opportunities for achieving the kind of life they want. Very often people don't have the right information. They don't know where to get that information from either. We need to collaborate with other professionals in the multidisciplinary team by providing referrals, by acting as a liaison between the people with disabilities and the other professionals in the team. We need to help people with disabilities and their families to access other services and support them in coordinating access to other resources, including the informal resources which they already have but which they may not be using. We need to use a variety of counseling and therapeutic approaches for undertaking individual and group work with disabled people and their families. We need to be able to we need to be able to be very strong advocates for people with disabilities, and we need to also work with mainstream services such as educational services, health and mental health services, and legal services to include awareness, to increase their awareness and understanding and knowledge of the issues faced by people with disabilities and their families, and ensure that they have this awareness so that they also reach out to people with disabilities. And lastly, by engaging in research and publishing peer-reviewed journals. So, students, this whole subsection was about gaining competencies in disability social work practice, which is a very challenging field of social work practice. And you need to your social work competencies which you acquire as a trained social worker, you need to add on some of these competencies in order to be an effective disability social worker. Thank you. I hope you will read. I have given some readings for further reading in this on this topic, and I hope you will go through them and enjoy reading them. Thank you.